Hey guys, welcome to Poor Man Mods. This is my friend's 1998 NASCAR Edition F150. No, unfortunately it's not a Lightning, even though it looks like a Lightning. I absolutely love this truck. You may have seen it before in a previous series of videos where we actually put nitrous on this thing. So this truck is pretty freaking cool. Single cab, short bed, 5-speed manual. I think it's 410 gears because it's the NASCAR Edition, so it's got good gearing. And it's got nitrous, but one thing it does not have yet is a set of headers. It does have a modified catback exhaust, but it's got the stock manifolds. So being that this is Poor Man Mods, we went for an affordable solution for headers. So I picked up this set of shorty headers that we're gonna be installing on this 4.6 liter NASCAR Edition F150. He put some 5.4 liter engine covers on the truck that you may see when we're under the hood, but it is a 4.6, not a 5.4. And these are for a 4.6 liter, and they do have provisions for EGR. So we're gonna be installing these on this truck. Something tells me it's not gonna be fun, but my friend Nick is telling me the saving grace for this is that the engine has only been in this truck for about 50,000 miles or so. So the factory hardware shouldn't be that bad, but we do live in Pennsylvania, and this thing has seen some salt. So hopefully, the studs and nuts on the manifolds aren't too bad, but we did prepare. And in addition to getting the headers, which they do come with new gaskets and new bolts for the downpipes, we also picked up a few exhaust manifold studs and replacement nuts in case we break something, but hopefully we don't. We did let this thing soak with some seafoam deep creep overnight, so hopefully that stuff did its work. And before I tear into it, I'll let you hear what this truck sounds like as of right now. It does sound pretty good. It's got an aftermarket exhaust, but still the stock manifolds. So I am very interested to hear what this thing is going to sound like with the headers. I'll try to show you as step-by-step as possible. It's going to be pretty tight in there because we're going to be in the wheel well, but you know, for the big stuff, the important stuff, and all the little tips and tricks, I will try to do the best that I can to show you how to do this job on a F-150 like this. So let's get to it. Wish me luck. So now that I loosen this one, I have confidence that it's going to fully come off because I don't trust the rest of these. A good practice to do is to take as much tension off the rest of them as possible. Once you get one cracked loose and you're pretty confident it'll come off, put it back on, because if you have all of these removed and you get to the very last one, there's going to be extra tension on that last stud that could give it some extra struggle. So get them all cracked loose, put it back on, put some lubricant on it, whatever. Just get them all cracked loose first, cinch them back down, and once you have all of them free, then you can start to remove them. Yep, it broke.
So it's a bit too tight to install the header on the passenger side at least. We're hitting this box here for the control arm. So what we're gonna do is remove that bolt for the engine mount and lift up the engine a little bit so it can actually fit the header inside there. But right now, this is holding us up, so the engine's gotta move.
And we're actually gonna be reusing the OEM gasket. It's a multi-layer steel gasket, which in my opinion is better. So we're gonna go with the stock gasket, and we're gonna attempt to have Nick jack up on the jack here, which is next to me. Hopefully it can raise the engine, and us slide the manifold on. Let's see where that gets us. Oh my goodness! Let's try that.
So I'm currently working on the driver's side manifold. Nick is trying to tackle the engine mount for the passenger side. But we're pretty much all the way finished the driver's side manifold, at least for removal. There's actually less tricks involved on this one. I've just been using a series of 3-inch extension and a deep socket, or a 3-inch extension with a short socket to get all of these nuts loose, and they've been doing pretty well after soaking with Seafoam Deepcrete. Haven't had any problems on this side. But yeah, no real tricks for this side. Pretty easy. Just make sure you soak everything. And hopefully you have as good of a luck as we've had. The one thing that was a struggle on the driver's side was the EGR tube. We had to use a 25mm wrench to hold the bottom nut right here, and then used a pipe wrench because we didn't have a 26mm on this guy, and this was very difficult to break loose. Very, very difficult. But now that this is loose, this pipe is separate from the manifold. We can get the manifold out, but then I think we have to transfer this piece over to the header if we want to retain EGR. If you don't want to retain it and you want to delete it, you can just cap off that portion of the manifold or put a bolt in there. But I think we're going to try to retain EGR. So now that this is loose, downpipe is disconnected. This was actually very easy. We just took the nuts off. The other side they broke, these did not. But if you run into a problem, you can just easily cut this one off. As for the one on the back side, it's not easy to get to if you need to cut it. But this side went very easy for us. The only struggle was that. So I'm gonna zip off the rest of the stud nuts. Those are all loose, and the manifold should come out. All right, one other thing we have to do for the driver's side is the dipstick has to come out. It was a bit of a bear to get it loose at the O-ring where it goes into the pan, but we finally struggled, twisted it, pried up on it, and now Nick can pull it out. We have both headers installed now. All the hardware is torqued. Driver's side, installing the header was a lot simpler than the passenger side. We did not need to lift the engine to get the driver's side header in. We did have a couple studs removed, which made it a little easier, but we did not have to jack up the engine on this side. But that EGR pipe was a bit of a bear to install. When we had the header in, this was, not lined up perfectly. So what we did, just used a pry bar and also heated the pipe a little bit to make it a little bit more flexible. And we just had to pry it into place. It was very hard to show on camera, but it does line up. We didn't really have to modify it, just heated up a little bit and bent it into place. And now, since both headers are installed, and they did fit pretty well, it's time to install the cats, the downpipes, whatever you want to call them. But I won't be able to really make a comment on their fitment for this because, as you can see, these are cut. They're not connected to the Y pipe. We modified these a long time ago, so these are kind of, you know, free floating. They're secured at the bottom with a band clamp so they can move around and whatnot. So I'm sure they're gonna line up, but if this was a stock Y pipe, I can't really make a comment on how it will fit. So Nick and I are gonna get these down pipes with the cats installed, and then we'll see how they sound. Should be awesome. We also did struggle a little bit with the dipstick. We did have to pull the dipstick out because it runs through the header right there. The process is straightforward. It was just a bit of a bear to get the dipstick out of the oil pan. So it's just one bolt that holds it in, pull it out, install the header, and then put the dipstick back in, but it was a pain in the butt to get it back into the oil pan. So now that everything's back together, it's time for this downpipe. And this is what I was saying, how these things are connected with these band clamps down here. We modified this a long time ago. So this one's not installed over here, but if the header didn't line up with this properly, you know, having this band clamp here allows us to tweak this a little bit. So unfortunately, I can't comment on how well it fits with the stock downpipes, but being that we modified ours like this a while ago, it lines up pretty darn good. Pretty happy with the fitment so far. As for this passenger side header, you know, a lot of what goes into this is just figuring out, you know, the angles and, you know, your attack approach to get to the nuts for the studs. But there are two nuts in particular that were very difficult to get to. This one right here, there's just really no good way to get to it. And what I needed was a very long wrench that came all the way up here. It was an extended, very long wrench. That was really the only way I could get to it. And then this one here is a big pain in the butt because see how close it is to that bracket beneath it? So the original fasteners for this hardware, they are M8 thread, but the heads are actually a 1/2 inch, so they use a 1/2 inch socket or wrench. Some of the hardware we chose to put new on, so like that nut there is a new M8 nut, but that's a 12 millimeter head, which is bigger than the factory 1/2 inch down there. But that nut there, you need to use the original size nut because the clearance between the nut and that metal bracket right below it is too close. And if you try to use a 12 millimeter socket there with a 12 millimeter nut, it will not work. You need to use a 1/2 inch socket there because it's the wall thickness of the socket. But also it's very tight right there. And what I used and what I thought was the easiest thing was a short 1/2 inch socket, but in a 1/4 inch drive and a 1/4 inch ratchet that was able to fit in there. You cannot get a box end wrench in there because the clearance of that bracket. An open end wrench doesn't fit that well, and there isn't really, you know, good angles here for a deep 3/8 socket and an extensions. But one thing you could do preemptively for this, when you get the old manifolds off to make your life easier, if you file down that bracket, notch it out a little bit, that will make your life a lot easier. And this was only a problem on the passenger side. But the rest of the fasteners, just typical wrenches and sockets can get to them. It just takes a little bit to figure out the appropriate approach angle. But that one there and that one there were the two hardest for sure. Like I said, for this one, you need a very long wrench. And then for this one, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch socket, deep, just enough to fit inside here. So that's really all the tricks. The rest is just taking your time and figuring it out.
right, truck's back on the ground, finally got the headers installed, and on the passenger side, we did decide to put a little bit of header wrap on the runner that was the highest up. I think that was runner number 4, all the way in the back. It was pretty close to the plastic valve cover, so we put some header wrap there to protect the valve cover, and also we put some heat wrap on some wire looms that were just pretty close to the header. You could choose to wrap the entire header if you want, but we just protected the stuff that the header was really close to. And also on the passenger side, the header was pretty close to some of the metal brake lines, and we put some heat insulation around them too, just to protect them. But other than that, install was pretty straightforward. We didn't have many problems at all. The biggest issue was just lining up the EGR pipe, which with a little bit of heat and a pipe wrench, we were able to bend that in place and line everything up, but they fit perfectly on the cylinder heads. And unfortunately, I can't speak on the fitment for them fitting up to the Y pipe, since the factory Y pipe on this truck has been cut and the cats were just held in with band clamps. So we were able to perfectly fit everything together, but if that was one solid unit, I don't know how the fitment would be. I would also recommend getting new hardware for this. I'd recommend getting OEM hardware because, like I said, in some of the locations, if you just put a regular M8 nut on the stud, the nut can be larger and require a larger socket, like a 13mm socket. The factory hardware requires 1/2 inch, which is smaller. So I would recommend getting something like a Dorman hardware kit for this ahead of time. You might break some studs or nuts. Luckily, we didn't break anything at all, except for the bolts that go to the downpipe, but luckily this kit came with new bolts for that. So for us, this took us about 2 days. Pretty typical for a V8 car with 200,000 miles, so really not too surprised that it took us 2 days. We did let it soak for 2 days with some seafoam deep creep, and that really helped out with breaking loose the fasteners on the manifold. I would highly recommend waiting a full day or even a weekend of soaking if your truck is in similar condition or worse. So if you are interested in doing a set of headers for your 4.6 liter F-150, I would recommend these. The truck sounds so much better and they're super affordable. I'll have a link to them in the description down below. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.